So we are in the middle of Advice to Householders on page 121. And the date, let's get that date because it's always interesting. Yes, here we are, Thursday, August 24th, 1882. So we're still fairly early on from when M has met Sri Ramakrishna. Not all the disciples have arrived yet, so it's still a lot of meet and greet, and here who comes and who do we say for one time and that's it, and who stays and becomes even more interesting. So here we go. Next they sang, I guess we'll find out more who they were. Oh, when will dawn for me that day of blessedness, when he who was all good, all beauty, and all truth will light the inmost shrine of my heart. At last Narendra himself was playing on the drums, and he sang with the master full of joy. With beaming face, chant the sweet name of God. When the music was over, Sri Ramakrishna held Narendra in his arms a long time and said, "You made us so happy today." The floodgate of the master's heart was opened so wide that night, he could hardly contain himself for joy. It was 8 o'clock in the evening. Intoxicated with divine love, he paced the long veranda north of his room. Now and then, he could be heard talking to the Divine Mother. Suddenly, he said in an excited voice, "What can you do to me?" Was the master hinting that Maya was helpless before him, since he had the Divine Mother for his support? Narendra, M, and Priya were going to spend the night at the temple garden. This pleased the master highly, especially since Narendra would be with them. The Holy Mother, that's obviously Sri Sarada Devi, they're giving a footnote here, but I think you all know who Holy Mother is by now. The Holy Mother, who was living in the Nahabat, had prepared the supper. Surendra bore the greater part of the master's expenses. The meal was ready, and the plates were set out on the southeast veranda in the master's room. Near the east door of his room, Narendra and the other devotees were gossiping. Narendra: "How do you find the young men nowadays?" M: "They're not bad, but they don't receive any religious instruction." Narendra: "But from my experience, I feel they're going to the dogs. They smoke cigarettes," which he did, of course, later. They smoke cigarettes. They indulge in frivolous talk. They enjoy foppishness. They play truant and do everything of that sort. I've even seen them visiting questionable places." M: "I didn't notice such things during our student days." Narendra: "Perhaps you didn't mix with the students intimately. I've even seen them talking to people of immoral character. Perhaps they are in terms of intimacy with them." M: "It is strange indeed." Narendra: "I know that many of them form bad habits. It would be proper if the guardians of the boys and the authorities kept their eyes on these matters." They were talking thus when Sri Ramakrishna came to them and asked with a smile, "Well, what are you talking about?" Narendra: "I have been asking M about the boys in the schools. The conduct of the students nowadays isn't all that it should be." The master became grave and said to M rather seriously, "This kind of conversation is not good. It isn't desirable to indulge in any talk but talk of God. You are their senior, and you are intelligent. You should not have encouraged them to talk about such matters." Narendra was then 19 years old, and M about 28. Thus admonished, M felt embarrassed, and the others also fell silent. Well, while the devotees were enjoying their meal, Sri Ramakrishna stood and watched them with intense delight. That night, the master's joy was very great. After supper, the devotees rested on the mat spread on the floor of the master's room. They began to talk with him. It was indeed a mart of joy. The master asked Narendra to sing the song beginning with the line, "In wisdom's firmament, the moon of love is rising full." Narendra sang, and the other devotees played the drums and the cymbals. "In wisdom's firmament, the moon of love is rising full, and love's flood tide in surging waves is flowing everywhere. O Lord, how full of bliss thou art! Victory unto thee! On every side shine devotees like stars around the moon. Their friend, the Lord all-merciful, joyously plays with them. Behold, the gates of paradise today are open wide. The soft spring wind of the new day raises fresh waves of joy. Gently it carries to earth the fragrance of God's love, till all the yogis, drunk with bliss, are lost in ecstasy. Upon the sea of the world unfolds the lotus of the new day, and there the mother sits enshrined in blissful majesty. See how the bees are mad with joy, sipping the nectar there. Behold the mother's radiant face, which so enchants the heart and captivates the universe. About her lotus feet, bands of ecstatic holy men are dancing in delight. What matchless loveliness is hers! What infinite what infinite content pervades the heart when she appears. O brothers, say Premdas, I humbly beg you, and one and all, to sing the mother's praise. Sri Ramakrishna sang and he danced, and the devotees danced around him. When the song was over, the master walked up and down the northeast veranda, where Hazra was seated with them. The master sat down there. He asked a devotee, "Do you ever have dreams?" Devotee, "Yes, sir. The other day I dreamt a strange dream. I saw the whole world was enveloped in water. There was water on all sides. A few boats were visible, but suddenly huge waves appeared and sank them. I was about to board a ship with a few others when we saw Brahman walking over the expanse of water. I asked him, how can you walk over the deep?" The Brahman said with a smile, "Oh, there's no difficulty in that. There is a bridge under the water." I said to him, "Where are you going?" "To Bhawanipur, the city of the Divine Mother," he replied. "Wait a little," I cried. "I shall accompany you." Master, "Oh, I am thrilled to hear that story." Devotee, the Brahman said, "I'm in a hurry. I will take you some time to get out of the boat. Goodbye. Remember this path and come after me." Master, "Oh, my hair is standing on end. Please be initiated by a guru as soon as possible." Shortly before midnight, Narendra and the other devotees laid down on a bed made on the floor of the master's room. Excuse me. At dawn, some of the devotees were up. They saw the master, naked as a child, pacing up and down the room, repeating the name of the various gods and goddesses. His voice was sweet as nectar. Now he would look at the Ganges, now stop in front of the pictures hanging on the wall, and bow down before them, chanting all the while the holy names in his sweet voice. He chanted Veda, Purana, Tantra, Gita, Gayatri, Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan. Referring to the Gita, he repeated many times, Tagi, 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 which means renounce, 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 which is an inversion of Gita, Gita, Gita. Now and then he would say, "O Mother, thou art verily Brahman, and thou art verily Shakti. Thou art Purusha, and thou art Prakriti. Thou art Virat. Thou art the Absolute, and thou dost manifest thyself as the relative. Thou art verily the 24 cosmic principles." In the meantime, the morning service had begun in the temples of Kali and Radhakanta. Sounds of conch shells and cymbals were carried on the air. The devotees came outside in the room and saw the priests and the servants gathering flowers in the garden for the divine service in the temples. From the Nahabat floated the sweet melody of musical instruments, befitting the morning hours. Narendra and the other devotees finished their morning duties and came to the master. With a sweet smile on his lips, Sri Ramakrishna was standing in the northeast veranda, close to his own room. Narendra, "We noticed several sannyasis belonging to the sect of Nanak in the Panchavati." Master, "Yes, they arrived here yesterday." To Narendra, "I'd like to see you all sitting together on the mat." As they sat there, the master looked at them with evident delight. He then began to talk with them. Narendra asked about their spiritual discipline. Master, "Bhakti, love of God, is the essence of all spiritual discipline. Through love, one acquires renunciation and discrimination naturally." Narendra, "Isn't it true that the Tantra prescribes spiritual discipline in the company of woman?" Master, "That is not desirable. It is a very difficult path and often causes the aspirant's downfall. There are 3 such kinds of discipline. One may regard woman as one's mistress, or look upon oneself as her handmaid, or as her child. I look upon woman as my mother. To look upon oneself as her handmaid is also good. but it is extremely difficult to practice spiritual discipline looking upon woman as one's mistress. To regard oneself as her child is very pure attitude. The sannyasis belonging to the sect of Nanak entered the room and greeted the master saying, Namo Narayanaya. Sri Ramakrishna asked them to sit down. Master, nothing is impossible for God. Nobody can describe his nature in words. Everything is possible for him. There lived at a certain place 2 yogis who were practicing spiritual discipline. The sage Narada was passing that way one day. Realizing who he was, one of the yogis said, You have just come from God himself. What is he doing now? Narada replied, Why, I saw him making camels and elephants pass and repass through the eye of a needle. At this, the yogi said, Is that anything to wonder at? Everything is possible for God. But the other yogi said, What? Making elephants pass through the eye of a needle, is that ever possible? You have never been to the Lord's dwelling place. At 9 o'clock in the morning, while the master was still sitting in his room, Mohan arrived from Konagar with some members of his family. In answer to Sri Ramakrishna's kind inquiries, Mohan explained that he was taking them to Kolkata. The master said, Today is the first day of the Bengali month. It's an inauspicious day for undertaking a journey. I hope everything will be well with you. With a smile, he began to talk of other matters. When Narendra and his friends had finished bathing in the Ganges, the master said to them earnestly, Go to the Panchavati and meditate there under the banyan tree. Shall I give you something to sit on? About 10:30, Narendra and his Brahmo friends were meditating in the Panchavati. After a while, Sri Ramakrishna came to them. M, too, was present. The master said to the Brahmo devotees, In meditation, one must be absorbed in God. By merely floating on the surface of the water, can you reach gems lying at the bottom of the sea? Then he sang, Taking the name of Kali, dive deep down, O mind, into the heart's fathomless depths, where many a precious gem lies hid. But never believe in the bed of the ocean, bare of gems, if in the first few dives you fail. With firm resolve and self-control, dive deep and make your way to Mother Kali's realm. Down in the ocean depths of heavenly wisdom lie the wondrous pearls of peace, O mind. If you yourself can gather them, if you but have pure love and follow the Scripture's rule, within those ocean depths as well, 6 alligators lurk, lust, anger, and the rest, swimming about in search of prey. Smear yourself with the turmeric of discrimination. The very smell of it will shield you from their jaws. Upon the ocean bed lies strewn unnumbered pearls and precious gems. Plunge in, says Ram Prasad, and gather up handfuls there. Narendra and his friends came down from their seats on the raised platform of the Panchavati and stood near the master. He returned to his room with them. The master continued, When you plunge in the water of the ocean, you may be attacked by alligators, but they won't touch you if your body is smeared with turmeric. There are no doubt 6 alligators, lust, anger, avarice, and so forth, within you, in the heart's fathomless depths. But protect yourself with the turmeric of discrimination and renunciation, and they won't touch you. What can you achieve by mere lecturing and scholarship without discrimination and dispassion? God alone is real, and all else is unreal. God alone is substance, and all else is non-entity. That is discrimination. First of all, set up God in the shrine of your heart, and then deliver lectures as much as you like. How will the mere repetition of Brahma profit you if you are not imbued with renunciation and dispassion? It is the empty sound of a conch shell. There lived in the village a young man called Padmalochana. People used to call him Podo. In this village, there was a temple in very dilapidated condition. It contained no image of God. Ashwata and other plants sprang up from the ruins of its walls. Bats lived inside, and the floor was covered with dust and the droppings of the bats. The people of the village had stopped visiting the temple. One day after dusk, The villagers heard the sound of a conch shell from the direction of the temple. They thought perhaps someone had installed the image of the shrine and was performing the evening worship. One of them softly opened the door and saw Padma Lochan standing in a corner blowing the conch. No image had been set up. The temple hadn't even been swept or washed, and filth and dirt lay everywhere. Then he shouted to Podo, "You have set up no image here within the shrine, O fool. Blowing the conch, you simply make confusion worse confounded. Day and night 11 bats scream there incessantly." There is no use in merely making a noise if you want to establish the deity in the shrine of your heart, if you want to realize God. First of all, purify the mind. In the pure heart, God takes his seat. One cannot bring the holy image into the temple if the droppings of bats are all around. The 11 bats are our 11 organs, 5 of action, 5 of perception, and the mind. First of all, invoke the deity, and then give your lectures to your heart's content. First of all, dive deep, plunge to the bottom, and gather up the gems. Then you may do other things, but nobody wants to plunge. People are without spiritual discipline and prayer, without renunciation and dispassion. They learn a few words and immediately start to deliver lectures. It is difficult to teach others. Only if a person gets a command from God after realizing him is he entitled to teach. Thus conversing, the master came to the west end of the veranda. M stood by his side. Sri Ramakrishna had repeated again and again that God cannot be realized without discrimination and renunciation. This made M extremely worried. He had married and was then a young man of 28, educated in college in the Western way. Having a sense of duty, he asked himself, do discrimination and dispassion mean giving up lust and greed? He was really at a loss to know what to do. M, to the master, what should one do if one's wife says, "You are neglecting me, I shall commit suicide"? Master, in a serious tone, give up such a wife if she proves to be an obstacle in the way of spiritual life. Let her commit suicide or anything else she likes. The wife that hampers her husband's spiritual life is an ungodly wife. Immersed in deep thought, M stood leaning against the wall. Narendra and the other devotees remained silent a few minutes. The master exchanged several words with him. Then, suddenly going to M, he whispered in his ear, "But if a person has sincere love for God, then all come under his control, the king, wicked persons, and his wife. Sincere love for God on the husband's part may eventually help the wife to lead a spiritual life. If the husband is good, then through the grace of God, the wife may also follow his example." This had the most soothing effect on M's worried mind. All the while he had been thinking, let her commit suicide, what can I do? M, to the master, this world is a terrible place indeed. Master, to the devotees, that is the reason Chaitanya said to his companion Nityananda, "Listen, brother, there is no hope of salvation for the worldly minded." On another occasion, the master had said to M privately, "Yes, there is no hope for a worldly person if he is not sincerely devoted to God, but he has nothing to fear if he remains in the world after realizing God. Nor need a man have any fear whatever of the world if he attains sincere devotion by practicing spiritual discipline now and then in solitude." Chaitanya had several householders among his devotees, but they were householders in name only, for they lived unattached to the world. It was noon. The worship was over, and food offerings had been made in the temple. The doors of the temple were shut. Sri Ramakrishna sat down for his meal, and Narendra and the other devotees partook of the food offering from the temple. And that is the end of that day. Any questions or suggestions or arguments?
I'm wondering, was he referring to the Brahmos? I mean, who was lecturing,
The Brahmos were big into lecturing. And,
Okay.
and so as long as they had a good old English education and they liked to lecture, then it would be a lot of book learning and that sort of thing. And they were sort of set up on a more Protestant model than a Hindu model. that they were just like, you give a lecture and then people feel inspired. And Keshab Sen, who was a deeply holy man, was famous for his oratory. So the other Brahmas wanted to do the same thing. So, and then Narendra at this time was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, and he was very active in it. So when you see all these Brahmo devotees coming in and out.
Yeah.
Yeah, good points, Sananda. Then we shall move on to Sunday, October 22nd, 1882. It was the day of Vijaya, the last day of the celebration of worship of Durga, when the clay image is immersed in the water of the lake or river. About 9 o'clock in the morning, M was seated on the floor of the master's room in Dakshineshwar, near Sri Ramakrishna, who was reclining on the small couch. Rakhal was then living with the master, and Narendra and Pavanat visited him frequently. Babaram had seen him only once or twice. Master: did you have any holiday during the Durga Puja? M: yes, sir. I went to Keshab, that's Keshab Sen from the Brahmo Samaj. Yes, sir, I went to Keshab's house every day for the first 3 days of this worship. Master: is that so? M: I heard there was a very interesting interpretation of Durga Puja. Master: please tell me all about it. M: Keshab Sen held daily morning prayers in his house, lasting till 10 or 11. During these prayers, he gave the inner meaning of the Durga Puja. He said that if anyone could realize the Divine Mother, that it is to say, could install Mother Durga in the shrine of his heart, then Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kartika, and Ganesha would come there of themselves. Lakshmi means wealth, Saraswati means knowledge, Kartika strength, and Ganesha success. By realizing the Divine Mother within one's heart, one gets all these without any effort whatsoever. Sri Ramakrishna listened to the description, questioning M now and then about the prayers conducted by Keshab. At last he said to M, don't go hither and thither. Come here alone. Those who belong to the inner circle of my devotees will come only here. Boys like Narendra, Pavanat, and Rakhal are my very intimate disciples. They are not to be thought lightly of. Feed them one day. That's in the Hindu tradition, feeding holy people is considered a very auspicious thing. One gets great merit from it. Feed them one day. What do you think of Narendra? M: I think very highly of him, sir. Master: haven't you observed his many virtues? He is not only well versed in music, vocal and instrumental, but he's also very learned. Besides, he has controlled his passions and declares he will lead a celibate life. He has been devoted to God since his very boyhood. How are you getting along with your meditation nowadays? What aspect of God appeals to your mind, with form or without form? M: Sir, now I can't fix my mind on God with form. On the other hand, I can't concentrate steadily on God without form. Master: now you see that the mind cannot be fixed all of a sudden on the formless aspect of God. It is wise to think of God with form during the primary stages. M: do you mean to suggest that one should meditate on clay images? Master: why clay? These images are the embodiment of consciousness. M: but even so, one must think of hands, feet, and other parts of the body. But again, I realize that the mind cannot be concentrated unless one meditates in the beginning on God with form. You have told me so. Well, God can easily assume different forms. May one meditate on the form of one's own mother? Master: yes. The mother should be adored. She is indeed an embodiment of Brahman. M sat in silence. After a few minutes, he asked the master, what does one feel while thinking of God without form? Isn't it possible to describe it? After some reflection, the master said, do you know what it is like? He remained silent a moment and then said a few words to M about one's experiences at the time of the vision of God with and without form. Master: you see, one must practice spiritual discipline to understand them correctly. Suppose there are treasures in a room. If you want to see them and lay hold of them, you must take the trouble to get the key and unlock the door. After that, you must take the treasures out. But suppose the room is locked, and standing outside the door, you say to yourself, here, I've now opened the door. Now I've broken the lock of the chest. Now I've taken out the treasure. Such brooding near the door will not enable you to achieve anything. You must practice discipline. The Gyanis think of God without form. They don't accept the divine incarnation. Praising Sri Krishna, Arjuna said, "Thou art Brahman absolute." Sri Krishna replied, "Follow me, and you will know whether or not I am Brahman absolute." So saying, Sri Krishna led Arjuna to a certain place and asked him what he saw there. "I see a huge tree," said Arjuna, "and on it I notice fruits hanging like clusters of blackberries." Then Krishna said to Arjuna, "Come nearer, and you will find that these are not clusters of blackberries, but clusters of innumerable Krishnas like me, hanging from the tree." In other words, divine incarnations without number appear and disappear on the tree of absolute Brahman. Kabir Das was strongly inclined to the formless God. At the mention of Krishna's name, he would say, "Why should I worship him?" The gopis would clap their hands while he performed like the monkey dance with a smile. But I accept God with form, and when I am in the company of people who believe in that ideal, and I also agree with those who believe in the formless God. M, smiling. You are as infinite as he of whom we have been talking. Truly no one can fathom your depth. M, smiling. Ah, I see you've found it out. Let me tell you one thing. One should follow various paths. One should practice each creed for a time. In a game of Satrancha, a piece can't reach the center square until it completes the circle. But once it's inside the square, it can't be overtaken by any other piece. M, that is true, sir. Master, there are two classes of yogis, the Vahudakas and the Kutichakas. The Vahudakas roam about visiting various places and have not yet found peace of mind. But the Kutichakas, having visited all the sacred places, have quieted their minds. Feeling serene and peaceful, they settle down in one place and no longer move about. In that one place, they are happy. They don't feel the need of going to any sacred place. If one of them even visits a place of pilgrimage, it's only for the purpose of a new inspiration. I had to practice each religion for a time, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity. Furthermore, I followed the path of the Shaktas, the Vaishnavas, and the Vedantas. I realized that there is only one God toward whom all are traveling, but all the paths are different. And that is a good place to stop on the right-hand side of the page, 529. Is there any question, any discussion, anything anyone would like to bring up? It's interesting that Sri Ramakrishna really made a point about telling M, just go to one place only, just come here. I think one thing is because if one person, spiritual leader, one place is saying one thing and you hear something someplace else, the tendency is to kind of take a little bit from both or just to get confused. So best to just stick to one thing and get to the end and achieve something rather than trying to get things from various places and creating an internal mishmash.
Rajapana, is the analogy of the tree of absolute Brahman used other than by Krishna? I mean, it's in the Gita, but is that found in the Upanishads? I'm not familiar. I don't know.
I can't bring any to mind. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I simply don't know. Okay, well, tomorrow we are going to have a lecture from Swami Vedarupananda at 11 a.m. on creation from the Word, as in the beginning was the Word. Because when I first read it, I thought it was world, but no, creation from the Word. Swami Vedarupananda. Next Wednesday, there will be a reading from Letters of Swami Triyananda, Spiritual Treasures. And next Saturday at this time, we will have another reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So thank you all for joining. Really nice to see everyone online and here. And I'll conclude with a chant. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.